Shabbat Shalom once again, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for joining us today on this Sabbath, most holy day to Yah. We thank you all for joining us virtually and on any platform that you may be viewing this on. We're going to continue our lessons in the salvation, understanding who salvation is really for. And this is part 4, sponsored by the House of Shiloh Ministries and presented by yours truly, Brother Andrew Bradley. And before we continue, we've already talked about who would deliver Torah and why Yahushua came to save his people. And now we're focusing on defining the audience of the New Testament, which is important to understand so we can really know who the scriptures referenced, okay? So we're going to continue in defining the audience in the New Testament, or the New Covenant, as some people call it. And let's move to the next slide, and we'll have the first reader, Brother, go ahead and read the verse for us. Matthew 12, 15 through 18. We're in the section now that says other scriptures describing the audience. Okay. Matthew 12, verse 15 through 18. But when Yahushua knew it, he withdrew himself from thence. And great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all, and charged them that they should not make him known, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold, my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall shew judgment to the Gentiles. Boy, this alone is contradicted by itself. Because if they would have put the word nations there, these verses alone would have told you exactly what the word nations mean. But they couldn't. They had to put Gentiles. And it doesn't make sense, because he already said in Matthew who he came to save or judge. He's already said that. They say judge to show judgment. But he had the authority to forgive sin, correct? And he proves that when he told the woman who was an adulterer, sin no more. So here, why would he be among his own people healing? And all of a sudden, they go to the prophet Isaiah and say, show judgment to the Gentiles. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. These verses contradict themselves, especially if you take into context. Because we already spoke on that no other nation has seen Yah's judgment. We just spoke on that in the previous part, 3. Nor have received his commandments. So if you go by this, Yah is only showing judgment to those who never knew him. Because that's what the European Western mindset tells you Gentiles mean, non-Israel. So it's saying now that he's only going to show judgment to non-Israel. So now, again, like I've said in previous, this is a Gentile translation. It's purposeful mistranslation, and should have been just nation, thus defining who is being referenced as nations. But they could not do that. They could not do that, because then it will be non-exclusive, and it will cause them to address the translation problem they have for the rest of the letters and so on in the New Testament. So again, this adds to our understanding of Gentile, and we'll discuss this in more detail later, very, very soon. So let's go to the next slide. If no one has anything to add, we'll go to the next slide and talk about this prophecy.
Okay.
All right, I'll go ahead and read this. Behold, this is Isaiah. This is what he was referencing. The author of Matthew was referencing Isaiah 42 and 1. Behold, my servant whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. Boy, are they consistent here, aren't they? They're very consistent. But because we know that Matthew referenced this in reference to Yahushua doing miracles among his own people, we know good and well this does not mean Gentile. And we also know that this is the word goy. We know that, first of all, let me not get too far. We know that judgment was never seen by any other group of the people because no one else had Yahuwah's Torah. And we've talked about that already. So these verses were mistranslated to ensure that, one, the old and the new correlate, and they made sure that the old and new was inclusive. And again, the word Gentile here in Hebrew for the old or original is goy. And it means nation, people, specifically of descendants of Abraham. So it should have said, shown or bring forth judgment to the nations or the nations of Israel. And let's think about this. How can you judge the Gentiles or those without Torah when they never had Torah? That shows the problem with Christianity. They don't understand why Yahushua came. He came because the Torah required it. Did not Paul say that the Torah was given due to transgression till the promise of the seed came? So Yahushua's arrival is directly related to Torah. And he is that promise, that seed. And this has to be true, or this verse contradicts all that's already been shared in these lessons, all of it. All right. Anybody want to share anything with this?
I do. Yahushua's coming is a direct bridge from Israel to Yahuwah that had to be built because of the transgression and continuous sins and disobeying the commandments that they did over the years. So that is correct. Also, in the Hebrew Bible, verse 1, chapter 42 of Isaiah says, "Behold my servant," that's consistent, whom I behold. But he says, "my elect one." And the word elect is capitalized, and so is the word one. He's talking about one specific group of people, in whom my soul delights. I have put my work upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to who? The other nations. Doesn't say the word Gentile.
Yeah, and that's because and I like it. I love the Sefer. It's my favorite Bible. But it also misguides you because the gentleman or the people who are responsible with Sefer translates Gentiles in with the same understanding of the Western mindset. It shouldn't. So when they say other nations, it again separates it.
Yeah, I guess if you look at it that way, when I look at other nations, I think of the other 12, the other
right. No, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I do see that, but I know that we have to make sure we leave. I tell Minister White, when I present an idea, I want to make sure that it's what they say, black and white, yes or no, yay or nay, because you can't leave room for conjecture for some, because they will find some way to twist it to their needs. That's just what people do. That's what they do. Anybody else?
I'd like to add a supporting scripture, please. And it begins in Psalms 147, and it's in verse 20. Psalms 147, verse 20. He has not dealt so with any nation. And as for his judgments, they have not known them. Hallelujah. So I'm looking at what Isaiah is saying in verse 1 in chapter 42 that you're highlighting right now. It says he shall bring forth judgments to the Gentiles. Another way of looking at that is, here is what it's not saying. He shall bring forth judgment against the Gentiles. That's what it's not saying. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. So could this be seen as him saying, I'm giving them my judgments. I'm giving them how they are to judge. I'm outlining for them what judgment looks like. Not just them going through judgments, but also having those judgments that were written back in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, where you'll see it. You understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes further to say in 42:4, 42:3, as you have said, he shall bring forth judgment unto truth. So you're right, the judgment is not against, the judgment is coming forth unto truth. And then it says in 4, he shall not fail nor be discouraged till he hath set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his Torah.
Mm-hmm.
So he's connecting the bridge again
Mm-hmm.
from Yahusha, which is this judgment, to Torah, which is the bridge between the breaking the Torah and Yahuwah is Yahusha, which is the judgment and bringing the judgment unto truth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Anybody else?
No, that's it.
All right. So let's move to the next slide, and we'll just do some critical thinking here. All right, let's use critical thinking. So we understand that the audience of the New Testament or the New Covenant were Hebrews called Gentiles, and we'll dig into this even more in the coming section that's after this. And the reason we can say that is because we've demonstrated in just this last verse we spoke to, and in part 3 as well, that whenever you saw the word Gentile, it was not used correctly, and the definition of it is not correct. And we're going to clarify that up right after this slide.
Mm-hmm.
So let's use critical thinking. Since people don't think that, people sometimes disconnect the real world from what we have in Scripture. But there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, what we see today is not unique to this timeline
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think about it. If I was born in Rome by Hebrew parents, that would make me a Roman citizen. All right? So if I was born in another country under different laws, it would be most likely I was born without Torah then, because I grew up in a country that did not require it. In fact, they required your focus on other things, especially dietary laws. They didn't have any. And that's what you ate, pretty much what everybody ate. And pig is absolutely worshipped in the Roman culture. If I was raised or born in any of the surrounding countries, and we consider the history of the region, like I told you, how Babylon destroyed the temple and forced the rules and changes and changed the Hebrew names, we know that, Daniel and his fellow Hebrew brothers, and how Greece forced Hellenism, which I'm going to define later, on every place they conquered. Mm-hmm. They changed language, religion, and names as well. And you see that because a lot of the names you see in the scriptures, in the New Testament scriptures, are Greek in many ways. So it's not hard to believe that many of the Hebrews who lived during times of the New Testament, New Covenant scriptures were living without Torah, mm-hmm. or in disobedience to Torah, because they lived in conditions that were not originally Torah. Torah was not delivered in those conditions when the Hebrews first got it. They had their own nation. They were their own people. They did not mix. And if you look into the history of the Hebrews as they left Israel, when they dispersed, mm-hmm. they stayed that way to their own demise, and many of them did. And I don't mean to try to sound contradictory. I'm not talking about those who were born and settled and born and lived there for years. I'm talking about dispersed, for example, from like Israel to Spain and Portugal, where they lived for over 1,000 years in peace until the Inquisitions came, the Christian Inquisitions came. or they had to force to be converted to Christianity, or they were shipped into slavery. There's plenty of historical documentation to tell you who they were, if you really want to know.
Mm-hmm.
So using a modern example, let's use the modern example again. I was raised in America, but because I was raised in America, it disconnected me from my ancestry completely. Completely. And you know that being dispersed like we were, it wasn't in very peaceful times. So you wouldn't even have time to carry a book with you, let alone the history of your people. So losing your ancestry, your religion, or your Torah, your language, and names was not hard to believe. You were just trying to live. You were worried about living in the conditions of death always. This was during Paul's time as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you can think about this to this point. Let's say I find out where my tribe is in Africa, which I'm working on right now. Hopefully in another month I'll have that information. If I went to go there, I would not know their laws,
True.
their language, their culture, their anything. I would be lost.
True.
I would be lost. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I would need someone from there to come to me to teach me who I am, what I should believe in, what names most likely I could have, all those different things I lost. That's what Paul was doing. He was going to people like me. He would have saw me and said, I could tell you're Hebrew because you're not going to look like a Roman. You're not going to look like a Greek. You're not going to look like you're a native-born person from the Babylonian regions. None of that. If I looked the way I looked and I was living in those regions, he would know that there would be a very high likelihood that I was a Hebrew by descent. Anybody want to add to this?
Not at the moment.
All right. So I believe we understand that the audience is really towards the Hebrews. And then most likely they were Hebrews that were not either from the region because they were born outside of Israel, or they were lost to Torah because of circumstances, most likely due to being dispersed. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've been talking about Gentile forever, it feels like. Now, let's get into the definition. Let's move to the next slide. We're going to do the correct meaning of Gentile. All right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get into this now. On the next slide, the first thing I want to get into is the etymology, the etymological history of Gentile. And just to define it for our audience, it is the origin and historical development of a linguistic form or a word and so on. All right? So what we're going to talk about is how the word Gentile evolved. And it doesn't take much. It's just, we're going to go brief.
Mm-hmm.
It has a Latin root, all right? Or it has a Latin origin. It was a noun, of course. And it was gentilis. And the definition was of the same family or clan. And the root of this word was from a word called gens gens or gentis, which means race or clan. And the Universal Dictionary of the English language says gens is this: among the Romans, for example, because it was a Latin word in Romans. Most Romans spoke Latin and wrote in Greek and so on. It denoted that those persons belonged to the same gens, which we just defined, race or clan, who bore the same name, of kindred blood, descended from a common stem or ancestor. So far, the definition just doesn't match, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was also a Latin adjective, and it was of or belonging to the same nation, i.e., person belonging to the same family.
Mm.
The Latin was used to translate the Greek word ethnikos, and the Latin was tuta ethna, meaning the nation.
Mm.
And the Greek word ethnos means the same for the Roman Latin word gens or gens, which we just said race or clan. So Gentile means belonging to the same clan or tribe, and thus really means excluding all others. Think about it. It does the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally telling you that it's only specifically talking of a particular group of people. So it really means excluding all others. In the Webster's unabridged dictionary of Gentile, of a clan, tribe, people, or nation. So if gens was the root of Gentile, and gens meant of the same name, blood, clan, and tribe, when it was used by the disciples of the Messiah, listen to this, you can say it meant those of their own ethnic group,
Mm-hmm.
Israelites. Because the historical root, or the etymology of ethnos, nation, is ethnikos, which is also the root of ethnicity or ethnics that you have in English.
Okay.
Nothing to do with saying a person is lawless or a person is outside of Israel at all. Just in the etymology of the word.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, the meaning understood by Hebrews would have been understood by the Greeks as well, by the way. So really, the translation problem we have with the word Gentile came from the European getting their hands on the scriptures and twisting the understanding. This was not done by the original Greeks because they would have known the root of Gentile because they understood Latin. Latin and Greek are very similar. Very similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like how you can see similarities in Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. You can see a lot of similarities in those three languages. Everybody follow me? Any questions with this?
Questions? None so far.
All right. All right. So now the audience should already be saying to themselves, man, I might have been able to argue with him just by using the scriptures because maybe I didn't quite believe him in those previous slides or previous parts or sections of the lesson. But how are you going to explain this away? But that's okay. We'll get into this more. And I don't think you're going to have any room to voice an alternative opinion. So let's move to the next slide here. There are three main words that Gentile is used for in modern Greek English translation. You have the goy, which is Hebrew, and it's Gentile in English.
Mm-hmm.
You have ethnos, which is Greek, Gentile in English. And you have Helen, which is Greek, Gentile in English. Look at the ambiguity in English. Those are three different words. Three different words. And though goy and ethnos are very similar in meaning, goy does mean something slightly different. So this right here just demonstrates how deceptive our translations in English can be. So this section of the lesson will focus on these three words, and we're going to go ahead and begin with ethnos. All right? Instead of goy, we're going to start with ethnos, because really that's the biggest one.
Okay.
All right? Everybody follow?
Mm-hmm. We're following.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All righty. Let's move to the next slide.
While
So let's define it according... I'm sorry?
I was just going to make a swift comment, and that is,
Yes,
when you highlighted those three different words, and yet in English it kept saying Gentile, Gentile, that supports the statement that you made earlier that people need to go back and look at the roots and origins. They need to know their history. They need to go back and see how some of our scriptures were formed, so they can grab a more in-depth understanding of what it is that's being discussed today. Today, I mean in
That's
our
so
current time.
true.
Yes.
So true. And it gets even worse when we talk about the word world. I found at least 4 different words, at least 4 different words in the New Testament alone that are used for world in the Greek. And they're all, there are 4 different words that are translated to world in English, but they don't mean that. They all don't have the same meaning. So there's a purpose behind that. That's what I believe you're saying. And we have to, if we are lovers of the truth, and you want to truly say the truth with all fullness, start trying to understand how to look for it. Because it will turn your world upside down once you find it. If you're a traditional Christian, it will. I know it did mine. I don't regret it though. I don't regret it. So here's the definition of ethnos from the Strong's Concordance, Exhaustive Concordance, and the Thayer's Greek English Lexicon. The Strong's, by the way, is a more broad and very biased English Western European bias definition. I'm going to say that multiple times in here, how the Strong's has a very westernized, modern thinking type of definitions. So it doesn't take in context the audience at all, typically, in their definitions. Thayer's is far more unbiased. And it does have some, because Thayer's was only written about 100 years ago, that lexicon. And it still has some of those biases, but they're far and few between. So most of the definitions I speak on are Thayer's, because there's a lot of honesty and unbiased details and truths in it. So the Strong's definition, it says it's a race as of the same habit. That is a tribe. Then here's the bias, specifically a foreign non-Jew. We just told you it couldn't mean that. I just showed you that even the etymology told you it couldn't mean that. One, usually by implication pagan. It can't mean that. Not solely, by the way, unless the nation happens to be a pagan nation that you're referencing. And again, I put modern European bias in definition. Thayer's, though, listen to Thayer's. A multitude associated or living together. That sounds like a nation, right? A multitude of individuals of the same nature or genus or genealogy. Sounds like a tribe. Sounds like a nation. The Thayer's Greek Lexicon is a specialized book in defining Greek translations of the New Testament. That's all it does. The Strong's is a broad book that does both Hebrew and the Hebrew Old and the Greek New. So it doesn't go into depth or detail like the Thayer's Greek Lexicon does, or the Brown Drivers Briggs Hebrew English Lexicon. Those are dedicated to the Hebrew or the Greek. And we just spoke on, remember, Gentiles' root is gens, which means race or clan. So ethnos also is the root of the English word ethnic. Thus, Gentile is really referring to race, clan, or ethnicity. So if Gentile doesn't mean pagan, as we're taught in the New Testament, what does it mean? All right? Everybody's following? We're going to get into some scriptures next.
Yes.
All right, let's move on. All right, Minister White, do you mind, please?
Okay. Romans 1:13. Now I would not have you ignorant, brethren, that oftentimes I purposed to come unto you, but was led hitherto, that I might have some fruit among you also, even as among other Gentiles.
Thank you. Now, in the previous section, part 3, we talked about brethren. But here, the majority of the time you see brethren in the New Testament, it is eldelphos. Eldelphos. And it literally means brother, whether born of the same two parents or only of the same father or the same mother,
Mm-hmm.
having the same national ancestor, belonging to the same people, countrymen. That's what adelphos means. It does not mean the ambiguous definition Christianity teaches you, where any believer is your brother.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lie. And I'm stern on that because we need to get away from just being spoon-fed by what we have historically. Because as you dive into your efforts to learn the truth, you will realize there's some trickery going on, and it will be a little upsetting. So let's go to the word other. I like this. It's loi poi. Loi poi. The remaining, the rest. It sounds odd, don't it? Why would he say, even as among the remaining Gentiles? What happened in Rome? Did all of them disappear and just a few were left? When did you have the remaining, the rest? That doesn't make sense. That's why they translated to the other. And in fact, what other Gentiles? What, there was more than people in Rome? There was what? I guess maybe some British citizens there that I didn't know about in Rome? It doesn't make sense. And again, here's the Gentile definition we talked about, ethnos, a multitude living together, a multitude of individuals of the same nature or genus, race, or nation. So with Israel surrounded by so-called Gentiles or other nations, it was completely surrounded by, because they were conquered now, they were subdued. They had other nations all around them with far more authority and power because Israel was disobedient, so Yah allowed the enemy to come. So how is there a remaining Gentile when they're everywhere? They can't go nowhere without seeing the other nations.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense. That's why I said, where did the rest of them go? Anybody want to add to this one?
Anybody? No, not yet.
All right. We'll keep going. Let's restate this on the next slide. Then. Now, I would not have you ignorant, brothers, Hebrew brothers. But oftentimes I purposed to come unto you, but was led hitherto, that I might have some fruit among you also, even as among the remnant of the nation.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds right.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Because this is what history is important. Israel and Judah got their butts whooped quite a bit. Even at this time, millions were scattered, millions were killed, and millions or more were going to be killed soon after Yahushua's death.
Mm-hmm.
As he prophesied it, and indeed came true. And you can see that in the Maccabees books. So there was just a remnant, especially in certain nations. It wasn't like in Rome, they had millions and millions and millions of Hebrews where they just took over Rome. They did. And we can prove that because they were enough to get on Rome's nerves where they got kicked out of Rome. And we'll talk about that verse later on in the lesson. Mm-hmm. We've only been taught by Christianity that all believers are brothers, but like we already talked about, that's not this word at all. Everyone is not your brother or your sister. If Paul wanted to see the remnant in Rome, he could not have been talking about Romans. Not a natural born Roman, genealogically born Roman. That makes no sense. None at all. If anybody want to add to this? Any questions?
Questions? Not so far. You're on a roll.
Oh, boy. All right. I'm hitting home runs. Let's continue. Minister White, read this next one for me, too.
Romans 2:14. For when the Gentiles, which have not Torah, do by nature the things contained in Torah, these, having not Torah, or a Torah unto themselves.
All right. So again, we already know ethnos is a multitude associated with living together. We can use that definition. But we know Gentile really means nation for two reasons here. Two reasons. One, Thayer's definition in the New Testament is specific to nation or race, period. And you can go crazy. If you got a lexicon, a Thayer's Greek lexicon, it will tell you that. Secondly, Paul states the audience already, which we just spoke on in the previous chapter in verses 13 and 17. You think that audience just changes all of a sudden in chapter 2? It doesn't make sense. Paul is writing a letter. Do we read a piece of the letter and ignore what was previously written? That's how the church teaches us, though.
Mm-hmm.
I could name a couple of verses out of Romans that they just hold on to like it's made out of pure diamonds without understanding what was written before or after.
Mm-hmm.
The church does not teach us to read the whole thing. Why would Paul speak to Yahudim about pagans when Hebrews were not allowed to be involved with them? Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Why is he talking of Torah to some non-Israelites? That wouldn't even make sense, especially if you understand the historical scriptures and how the heathen or the non-Hebrew was referenced. It doesn't make sense. It was Paul's ministry to teach the Gentile or the nation. But the way it's read, it was Paul's ministry to teach the Gentile, not others, according to Acts 9 and 15, right? Now, the reason I bring this back up, because in part 1, we talked about that verse, where Yahushua told, I can't remember exactly who it was in that verse, but he said, because they were scared of Paul. This is when he chose Paul,
mm-hmm. and
he blinded Paul for 3 days just to bring the recall back. And he said, no, Yahushua said, no, I chose him because I'm going to have to let him know what he's going to suffer for my name. Because he had a purpose for Paul. But he said he would suffer for the Gentiles. Now, this is Yahushua, who's already said in previous many verses, we can point in the Gospels, where he said, I was born for my people, I have come for my people, I have come for the lost.
Mm-hmm.
I don't I only come for the lost, and I don't give to the dogs, and so on. There's many, many verses, and we talked about that in the previous lessons, sections, where I quoted at least 8 verses where he was specific for his reason. So why all of a sudden, after his death and resurrection, he shows up and changes his mind?
Mm-hmm.
Why would he contradict himself? And the church would say, well, he can change his mind. He has that authority. That's not how Yahuwah or Yahushua work, because we know they never change. He says that in his words. He never changes. So this has to be referencing the tribes in Rome. Again, understanding that the audience has already been set in chapter 1, verse 13 and 17. Anybody want to add anything?
I think that supporting scripture you're looking for, you have it written there already. It's in Acts chapter 9, verse 15, when it says Yahuwah was talking to Ananias, and he said, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the scripture you were looking for? Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. And that's so contradictory. That's so contradictory. Not only is it contradictory with what he's quoted himself saying, but we also now know the true definition of Gentiles. And that doesn't even make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And Stayers already tells you Gentiles is of the race or clan or people or a multitude associated living together. We know that can't mean others. The word that should be for when the nations or or the remnant or something like that. And the better way to say in this verse, it should have said, for when the nations who do not have the Torah. And that's understanding that nations is referencing the 12 tribes, which I will prove after we get through the Gentiles, understanding the Gentiles, which will be next to Shabbat.
Okay.
All right. Any more? Anybody else?
No, that's it.
All right. Let's move to the next verse.
I had one comment on the other slide. When it says that right here, it says they do by the nature the things contained in Torah, although they do not have Torah. So in order to do something by nature and instinct, you know that it has to be in your being already, which means that their forefathers had an access to Torah. So that tells you right there that he's talking about a certain group of people that had access to Torah.
Or their people have it because we know, and this is outside the context, but we know that Torah impacts you on a cellular level. And with their ancestors being in Torah, there's going to be a piece of that in you where you're going to naturally be that way. For example, I think I'm lying. You think I'm lying. Let's use a modern example. We know that the 12 tribes are deep in Africa, deep all over Africa. And I don't have to explain myself. All you got to do is dig the history up yourself, because that's not this lesson. But I bet you we all act alike, even those who proclaim their Hebrew heritage. We all are very similar, and you cannot explain it. Why does a Jamaican act like an American black male, at the same time acts like a Nigerian, or acts like a Bantu, or the Limba?
The Limba tribe.
How? Because there is a genetic link to the behavior, to the natural behavior of who we are. Why does every one of those groups praise and dance and sing the same way? It's who we are, and it's rooted in our genetics. And that was Torah to our ancestors. So those who had Torah and realized that we're grabbing it back have the ability to obey it in a way no other nation can. Because it was originally given to us. It's in us, and we don't even know it. Anybody else want to elaborate?
Not at the moment.
Oh, man. All right. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Minister Ronnie, you want to read this one for me? Romans 11:13.
I got you, for I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify mine office, if by means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them.
All right, this supports what we read earlier in lesson 3. Thank you, Minister. In part 3, where he says he was changed for the hope of Israel, Paul said. So we spoke on this earlier, too, in previous lessons. Paul was an apostle of, meaning from, the Gentiles. He didn't say for. He could have easily said, inasmuch as I'm the apostle for the Gentiles. Or, as Minister White told me, he could have said appointed to the Gentiles. But he wasn't. He was letting you know, I come from them. Where does Paul come from? If you know his history, all right, he was born outside of the 12 tribes, the land. He was a Roman citizen. So he was of the other nations. He was of the other nations, literally. That's why it's important to know what Gentile really means. Paul is telling you, I'm the apostle of the other nations. Because I come from that. That's why he was perfect for this. And what made Paul even unique is that, well, we'll get to that. And then he speaks to my flesh, and we already know that flesh means fellow countrymen, natural origin. We've talked about that in previous slides as well. Here, therefore, Gentile is being used to reference Hebrews by genealogy, and Paul is including himself in this. Thus, Gentile doesn't mean in the New Testament people who are not of Israel, of Yahudah, if the word is translated correctly. And since Paul is including himself in this, then Gentile means something in relation to what Paul is. And if we know what Paul is, we know Paul is a Hebrew who was a master almost of the Torah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Pharisee, so the Torah was serious to him. So Gentile could mean of another nation without Torah, or as Paul was, because many of those people were without Torah because they were born outside their heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could be like Paul, a Pharisee, and you know how Yahushua felt about the Pharisees. Because he said, if your righteousness doesn't come above them, you're in trouble because their obedience was terrible.
Right.
They did all kinds. They followed the Talmud, their own commandments. They put their commandments above Yah. That's what he told them. So he was so that means Gentile can mean a Hebrew who had Torah but didn't fulfill it correctly, wasn't fully obedient, had all kinds of issues with it. And Paul was in that situation when Yahushua came and knocked him off that pony or horse he was on. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, Paul's ministry was to the Hebrews outside of Israel and Yahudah. And if we understand that the disciples' ministry to the lost of Israel, we know that Gentile meant Hebrews separated from Yah, period.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what that means. If Paul believed in Torah but considered himself a Gentile, just like we talked, then Gentile to a Hebrew meant a Hebrew born outside the homeland,
Mm-hmm.
Torah or not fully obedient to Torah as Paul was, because he includes himself in this.
Mm-hmm.
We're not taught to look into things like this. We really miss what's being spoken of by Paul's own hand.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anybody want to add to this?
Finally, I do.
Yes, sir.
Uh-oh. All right.
Here we go. Okay. One quick comment. The part that you have highlighted. I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them. What you're hearing Paul say is what you heard Yahushua say. So when people say that Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles, but Peter is the apostle to the Hebrews, that's not true. I grew up in church this way. Christianity told us that Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. But when you hear what Paul is saying right here, he says, I'm trying to provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, my brothers and sisters, right? So that I can do what? Save some of them. All right, then go back to what Yahushua said. Why did he say he came? I came to save my flesh. I came to save my people. Therefore, Paul is actually picking up the mantle where Yahushua left off and carrying forward the same mission, not a separate mission, right? Not a different mission, but the same mission. And if Paul's mission is the same, is to the people of Israel and the house of Yahudah, then that means that the mission of the apostles are also the same. So the mission, the directive has not changed from the beginning. It's always been to save Yah's people. It's always been to save Yah's people and not to save the other individuals around the world. It's to save Yah's people. Why? Because there is a goal, there is a purpose, there's an intention in mind for that salvation. Because they are going to be the light to everyone else. Salvation, according to the scriptures, comes by Yahudah. Isn't that what it says? So that means Yahudah needs to be saved. so that everyone else can be saved, can be assisted from Yahudah's salvation. So people should be looking to help the Yahudim, the people of Yah. They should be looking to help our people and not the other people perpetrating to be our people over in the land of Israel. They should be, their real salvation is going to come from helping their true, real, born, blood, bought, purchased, redeemed individuals of the Most High. When you begin to help them,
and that brings up a point too. You said, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I want to say this right before, because I know Minister Ronnie wants to say something too. But you make a good point, because can you imagine the nation who have brutalized the tribe of Yahudah and have them in their backyard to this day? Mm-hmm. When they finally realize who we are and that they've been blessing the wrong group, the liars, the impersonators, mm-hmm. and they should have been blessing the ones that live next door, how shocked their faces are going to be.
It's so true.
That they're going to have to accept that the scriptures that they worship and love and claim this and claim that by were written by our ancestors. What a shock.
Do you know that scripture says that bless those who bless you, right? Well, the opposite is true, because they've been cursing us. The curse is chasing them right now. And the only way to reverse that curse is to do what the scripture says. Bless them so that you may be blessed. Because you have cursed them, you shall be cursed. You shall be cursed. And this is something they should be weary of. Because remember in the scriptures, when the king discovered the laws, he became frightened. And he said, whoa, I have found out that we are violating Yah's laws and we're in trouble. This is the epiphany that the people need today around the globe. But we can just stick with America at the moment. They need this realization that they are walking against the Most High's people, and that is going to be to their detriment. The curse is coming for those who are mishandling Yah's people, either by word or in deed, in the things that they do. The curse is looking for them. And to reverse that, they're going to have to bless the ones that they have the disdain for. I'm sorry, I'm off my rant. Okay.
That's okay. I was joining you. Anybody else? I think Minister Ronnie, did you have something?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's not ranting, it's teaching. And also, I see people taking their Bibles and throwing them into the fire, because they're going to realize that the word was schooled just enough for them to be confused and to not have the truth, which is the twisted truth, which is the same tree that came out of the Garden of Eden. And that is why in the Bible you see over and over again where he said they will come to my Godesh mountain and be taught the truth. They're going to want to hear it from the mouth of those that have been practicing it, period. Mm-hmm. They're not going to trust what was written. They're going to want to be taught by people that are exploring the truth and teaching the truth.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And that's why they're going to get themselves to the Godesh mountain, which is a mountain of people.
That's right, because we know that the prophecy says that I will write a new covenant, not like the one written in stone, but I will write a new one where my law will be written on the minds and the hearts, and no man will have to teach you anymore. No one will have to teach you. And he's talking about the Hebrews. And what tickles me about that verse, that prophecy, Paul speaks of it as well. And he says that our Messiah is the mediator of a better covenant. Mm-hmm. The very covenant they try to say that has no association to the law. He says right there, I believe in, I don't know if it's in Hebrews.
Hebrews chapter 10, verse 16.
Hebrews what?
Hebrews chapter 10, verse 16.
See, I got y'all didn't know I had my own personal Google, right? But my own e-sword. But thank you, Minister.
You're welcome.
So the point I'm making is he's saying that Yahusha is the mediator of a better covenant based upon the writing of Torah on your mind and hearts. So where do they get the separation of? All right? Separating the Torah from the salvation and the message of the Messiah. That's a lie. He just showed you what his purpose is. So again, I'm on that rant too. We kind of move to the side, but you can't help it sometimes. Anybody else?
Yes. Also, I may provoke to emulation. Romans 11:13. Then which on my flesh, the word emulation means jealousy. It means to push to excel above. So Paul wanted to push the people that were not following Torah into a state of, I want to not only study Torah, go back into what my forefathers did, but I want to exceed what you were doing. So that's what emulation means. It means to push to jealousy, to move past what the person is already. Which means that there had to be some background of Torah in order for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I like that word. I think this is why the word emulation is important, because it teaches the audience the importance of looking up the definition, because that's not a common word that's used even in modern English. So most people won't understand what it means. But if you look it up in its original Greek, you will get a good understanding. All right, anybody else?
Yes, I have one more, please, supporting scripture. I want to walk you.
Add it, please.
I want to take you to Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah, chapter 31. Listen to what it says. This is chapter 31, and it's in verses 32 and verse 33. This is what it says. Not according to the covenant that I cut with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Mizraim, which covenant they broke, although I was a husband unto them, says Yahuwah. Verse 33. Here's the point. But this shall be the covenant that I will cut with, guess who? The house of Yasharel. It didn't say the world. It didn't say every nation under the sun. It says with the house of Yasharel. After those days, says Yahuwah, I will put my Torah in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. So this covenant of putting the word Torah into the hearts and mind is being placed in the house of Israel. It's not being placed in the house and the mind of every believer. This covenant is with the house of Israel. It's with the people that Yahushua said he came to save. He said, I came to save my people. Does that mean that he disregards the rest of the world? Of course not. Of course not.
But I thought the Old Testament was done away with. We don't really have to learn the Old Testament.
Well, Hebrews.
But why is Paul referencing it then?
Exactly. And if this is something that's going to happen in the future, and Paul is referencing it, saying that this is happening, but look what he's putting into the hearts and mind. He says, my Torah.
His Torah.
So why would he be putting a covenant, which means he can't break it, which means it's eternal? Why would he be putting an eternal covenant in the inward part of a people that is no longer valid after the death of his son? That makes no sense.
That's fine. It makes no sense. And that's why it's important to understand the definition of Gentile, because the world will quickly respond and say, oh, well, that's meant for Israel only. So that's not to us. The law was given to them only, which is true. But then they have a problem. Explain to me why you think any of the scriptures reference you then. Why would
and even so,
75%? Why would 75% of the book be written in reference to Hebrew, and then boom, all of a sudden, it's not. The rest of it's no more.
Right?
And then to say that what Paul just referenced, which is one of my favorite scriptures, Jeremiah 31 and 32. Why would he reference it? The apostle, supposedly to the Gentiles, quote unquote, is referencing this prophecy and saying Yahusha, the one who said that now Peter should go to the Gentiles, is the mediator of this prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Of the better covenant. It doesn't get rid of Torah. So if this new covenant does not get rid of Torah, how can you justify Torah being gone? Because you want to grab that one verse in Romans 6 and 14 or Galatians 3 and 28 or something nonsense like that where you think it just is he's talking about something and you don't seek understanding? I get upset at this and frustrated because I didn't understand Paul's writings without great effort. But you'll have somebody that don't take the effort to learn what Paul is really saying and say, see, you're wrong, Drew. You're wrong. Paul says we are no longer under the law. But Paul's talking about 5 different laws in the letter to the Roman believers. So which law is he talking about? People, I get frustrated, try not to get frustrated, but it's the truth. You gotta look at it in its entirety and seek the truth if you really want it. If you really want it.
There's a game we used to play when we were children. It was called hide and seek. I don't know if any of you have ever played that game, hide and seek. So the Messiah is admonishing us to seek the truth, right? So if you've played the game hide and seek, then you know how difficult it is to find the ones that are skilled at hiding. There are some that are really skillful at hiding, and they're hard to find. And you have to have an idea of the nooks and crannies of, to know where to know where to find them. So when Yahusha says for us to seek the truth, that means it's something you have to go looking for. It is not standing readily in front of you. It's something you're going to have to put effort into discovering, right? So if you're reading the scriptures, and if it were that evident and plain that when you just read it at face value, you can say, I have the truth, then he wouldn't bother to tell you to seek it. He understood that the scribe's pen had been crafty because the scripture says so, and that the truth is something you're going to have to look for. But most people don't do their due diligence in that area. So they take it just as they read it without any biblical history, without any context of the audience or any consideration of the author or anything, any of those key points. So they miss the richness of what is being said. So they're not seeking the truth. They're just reading the book. And they're not studying the book. Those are different things. Okay. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
I agree. 100% I agree. And the more I think about that, the more, especially when talking to some of those that do not wish to do this, but they're quick to say that you're wrong. They will go and grab some type of quick reference on the website or something and say, see, if the truth was that easy, then I don't really have any authority to teach anybody. You can go get it yourself. People, this is not arrogance. But those who are able to teach put effort into getting to that point to teach. And it's a lot of effort.
Considerable effort.
So it takes hours upon hours upon hours, months, sometimes months just to do one lesson. So you dig and seek, and you realize sometimes what you found isn't quite the full message. And you go looking again, and you review, and you find out, oh, there's more to it, even months later.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't fall in your lap. All right. So let's move to the next slide here.
I had a comment.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, a reference to support what you just said. 2 Timothy 2:15, study to show thyself approved unto Yahuwah, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly divided the word of truth.
Mm-hmm.
So it tells you right there on to understand the word, you have to study and show yourself approved to receive the instruction of the word. And the second thing I was going to preach, that even so, we have what they call a New Testament and an Old Testament, dividing the word.
Mm-hmm.
But the Old Testament gave birth to the New Testament. So without the Old Testament, as they call it that, there will be no New Testament, because the disciples is preaching in a modern time the word that was already written and passed orally from one bloodline to the next. So therefore, so how can you separate the old from the new if the old gave birth to the new?
Well, let's be more. Let's see, bringing up history, Minister Ronnie. I guess we're gonna have to delay this next slide because I got something to say about that.
Me too.
I'm gonna add to that.
Me too.
So let's ask the audience this: what is the Old Testament? What is the New Testament? Do you think that a Hebrew wouldn't dare name their scriptures the Old Covenant or the Old Testament, and then grab a bunch of letters written by disciples that have no history or legitimacy comparative to, now only comparative to, the prophets and the Torah and so on, and then call this a new covenant and give that authority above the old? Do you think a Hebrew would do that? No.
Absolutely not.
So we need to understand who named them and why. That's the history the church don't want to teach. Because the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Universal Church, created the separation on purpose. Because they knew Torah was not written for them. And the scriptures, the original scriptures, were not including them. But they knew what they had could be used to control and create a universal religion. They had to create an idea of separation. The Old Testament name and the New Testament name was created by the white Roman Catholic Church starting around the 4th century. Not Hebraic at all. But we sit back with our arms crossed and assume everything that's been given to us is holy. Well, let's use common sense, and then I'm going to let Minister White speak to this. If everything was so right, think of this then, because pretty much the whole world is starting to accept this point I'm about to make. If the Roman Catholic Church was willing to change the face of our Messiah, the name of our Messiah, and the names of every single person in the scriptures, including our Most High, Elohim, you're telling me they couldn't change nothing else?
And the 4th commandment?
We already know. Exactly. Yeah, oh my gosh, don't get me started. Yes. So you're telling me then that I should just accept what we have and ignore that can change the look and the name of the Messiah? All that alone can be easily proven right, that I'm right. That the rest of the stuff they haven't touched? Come on, people. That doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have people that believe that there's a white Jesus. But the church won't teach you to go look up the history of that name either. If you knew the history of that name, you will be ashamed of yourself to use it, to reference the Messiah. But boy, if I tell somebody now the history of that name, they'll look at me crazy and call me Antichrist and curse me out.
They already do
Which I've been done pretty much already.
True.
Go ahead, Minister White.
I wanted to piggyback off of what Sister Ronnie said in 2 Timothy chapter 2. That's the verse she was quoting, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, when she said, study to show thyself approved, a workman that needed not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. I want to highlight that last piece, rightly dividing the word of truth. Rightly dividing the word of truth. If you can hear it, as Yahushua would say, those who have eyes to see and ears to hear what the Ruach is saying. Rightly dividing the word of truth is equivalent to the lamb that has the divided hoof that chews the cud. Because the lamb, which is a clean meat, that goes back into Leviticus, right? You have to have, the lamb had to be able to chew the cud and have a split hoof or a divided hoof for you to eat it, for it to be considered clean meat, right? But then the scriptures taught us that the lamb refers not just to four-legged animals, but it refers to two-legged animals too, right? So now when we elevate our understanding and see that this phrase, rightly dividing the word of truth, chewing the cud, you need to be a clean animal, one that's set apart, clean, eating, digesting, bringing back up, chewing on it again, bringing it back up the way the lamb behaves in his natural eating habits until you have digested that fully. Then you will understand, because when you've truly digested it, your body divides it and separates the meat, right? The food, and determine where it goes. That's the stomach part. So we're speaking spiritually now. This is what a lamb should be doing. Us as lambs should be doing this. Rightly dividing the word of truth. And if it's truth, then it's clean meat. It's clean food, right? Because lambs eat clean food. Okay, one more thing I wanted to highlight. In Zechariah chapter 12, it says this. I want to show you the scripture that supports the comment that I made about the salvation of Yahudah. It says in Zechariah chapter 12, verse 7, Yahuwah also shall save the tents of Yahudah first. Let me say that again. Yahuwah also shall save the tents of Yahudah first, that the glory of the house of David, or David, and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Yahudah. So Yahudah is going to be saved first. And then that governing tribe, that governing people shall go forward to take that salvation that they have received forward. So imagine why they do not want the lion to be aroused. They want the lion to remain asleep. Because when the lion begins to roar, who won't hear it? Even the whole forest hears the lion coming when he begins to roar. So they're doing everything right now to keep Yahudah asleep. What do I mean by sleep? To keep him in slumber, right? To keep him in disobedience, right? To keep him in sin, and to keep him ignorant of who he is and what he should be doing. That way he cannot arise, he cannot awaken. And that means he can't help anyone because he can't even help himself. As long as that can happen, then there is a people that stay on top, and there's a people that always stay at the bottom. Oh, there's a movie of it?
There's an old movie that says a certain thing that.
Right.
Yeah, you got to say that again so they can hear you.
I was just saying there's a really old movie that kind of says something similar. I'll have to find it and share it, but it's really interesting because it is true. That's the truth. That's what they're doing.
That's what they're doing. So salvation comes. Yahuwah from the tribe, let me rephrase that, Yahusha from the tribe of Yahudah, Yahusha from the tribe of Judah, came to save his people, Israel, Judah being first. And then it's going to go forward. It's going to go forward and it will spread out to the rest of the world. He did not come to save the whole world the first time around. He had a very specific and glorified mission. And he accomplished that mission. And now that mission is, the true intent of that mission is unfolding. As the lion has awakened. The lion has awakened and is continuing to wake up. This is the time that he came for. All right. Thank you, Brother Andrew.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. We'll do one more slide and we'll call this a done deal.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next slide, which should begin with Paul was of the Gentiles, right? So Paul was of the Gentiles, meaning of their ethnicity, because we've already talked about the definition of their clan and tribe. And why? Because he was a citizen of Rome. And we've talked about this briefly. And you can see this in Acts 22:3, where he declares this: I am verily a man, which am a Hebrew. But look where he was born, in Tarsus, in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of Torah of the fathers, and was zealous towards Elohim, as ye all are this day. So he was indeed their ethnicity. It made him perfect to do this because he was born outside of Israel in a region now known as modern-day Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
So notice, however, he was taught Torah by Gamaliel, and Gamaliel was a Pharisee and a doctor of Torah. And so this is what made Paul perfect for the task Yahushua gave him, to teach about the Messiah through Torah from the understanding of growing up outside of Israel, or being born outside of Israel. So Paul knew firsthand the conditions of his ethnos, his ethnicity, his nations, growing up with them, or growing around with them, or being around with them outside of Israel. He knew what it was going to take. He knew it. Mm-hmm. And Yahushua knew he needed someone astute in Torah as well, higher than most. Mm-hmm. Higher than most. That's why Paul was able to quote so many Old Testament original scriptures. I've shared this in other lessons before, but I know Paul has quoted almost 300, or I would say at least 300 times have there been references, quotations from the Old in the New. That tells you what they were teaching from, by the way. Mm-hmm. All right. Is this clear to everybody? Anybody want to add anything to this?
Nothing over here.
All right. Well, we're going to end our lesson, our part 4 today, in the salvation, who salvation is for, in the Gentile definition, of including the ethnos, to understand what ethnos really means. Mm-hmm. We thank you all for joining us on this Shabbat virtually, mm-hmm. and any platform that we also post this on. We thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, we do. And we say Shabbat Shalom to those who are worshiping with us in person, and also those who are with us online. And Shabbat Shalom to those of you who will join us via video in the near future. Shalom.